Basically, the way to think about this is, while China's creditor position does give it some autonomy in global financial markets, being a creditor is better than being a debtor, all things equal. The amount of influence that a creditor has on a debtor really depends more on the status and financial health of the debtor per se, not the creditor. Now, the way to think about this is, if you look at the International Monetary Fund, the International Monetary Fund is often known as the lender of last resort. What that indicates is they are lending to governments, sovereigns that can't get debt financing anywhere else. In that situation, the IMF would have a considerable amount of influence. The United States, while we do have a large debt held by the public, something like $13 or $14 trillion held by the public, and $1 trillion is not an insignificant share of that. United States debt is widely known as the least bad asset available in the world, and so it is very broadly and deeply held, and there are almost always buyers. Given that, there's relatively, because of the condition of the United States as a debtor, there's relatively little influence any of our creditors, China included, could have on us. Additionally, even a sovereign in a strong creditor position would be circumscribed in how much influence they could have, even over a debtor that they wanted to target for pressure or financial sanctions. The reason for that is that China, because it has a floating currency, has some of its own management challenges if it made large shifts in the mixture of the debt it held or sold or retained. Well, debt held by countries that have floating currencies is not like debt that you and I have. You know, we have mortgage debt. Most of us may have a car loan or something, personal debt. And this is debt that, of course, must be repaid, and we take our banking obligations very seriously. Sovereign debt is mostly used as a management tool by the governments. The way to think about this is, if you want to maintain stable currency values versus other economies with which you trade and in some cases compete, you use debt held in denominations not your own to manage your own currency. So think about this very simply. If you want your currency value to increase in the market, you need to buy that currency. When you buy it, you push upward demand on the currency value. Now, the question is, what do you use to buy it? The answer is foreign debt. So basically, China, in this case, would use, if it wants the RMB value to increase, it would buy RMBs and use one of its foreign holdings, US dollars or pounds or yen, to make that transaction. So it's principally used to manage currency values over and stabilize your own economic profile versus the rest of the world. That's a great thought experiment to run. Now, we actually have some practical experience with this. In August of 2015, China, for reasons unrelated than economic pressure, for its own reasons, sold a large quantity of U.S. Treasuries, about $180 billion worth. And the answer from that practical exercise was it had almost no effect on the overall value of U.S. Treasuries. What that would tell you is, because the U.S. Treasury market is very large and deep and liquid, that there were enough for all the Treasuries that China sold, that $180 billion, there were sufficient buyers out there at the market rates to basically have no effect. I think at the 10-year yield changed something like 60 basis points. That's 0.6%. Over 10 years. So that's essentially dust in the ups and downs of the financial market. So we have that experience to go with. If you do a thought experiment that if China sold all $1 trillion all at once, the most likely thing that would happen is China itself would be harmed. The reason it would be harmed is that the Treasury would probably print dollars to prevent a major decline in the value of the dollar. In doing so, the dollar would sink somewhat versus the RMB, and importantly, the U.S. is a major importer of Chinese goods. It would make Chinese goods more expensive, all things considered being equal, to import than it would be before that large sale, which would reduce China's export potential. So the biggest effect of a broad-scale dump of U.S. treasuries by China would be China would actually import fewer goods to the United States. That's another very good question. Reserve currency is a somewhat separate issue from the performance of a sovereign's debt instruments. The reserve currency basically is the scorecard by which, a lot of commodities, oil being the one that's in the news the most, is priced in dollars because dollars are the reserve currency. But also the reserve currency is an indication of the depth and liquidity of dollars as a market. Now, how U.S. dollars would perform and U.S. debt instruments would perform if the dollar were not the reserve currency is more a function of how the U.S. behaves with regard to honoring its obligations in debt markets. That's the most important element. One of the reasons the U.S. dollar is so strongly valued and is as I mentioned, it is the least bad asset in the world, is the United States has never defaulted on an obligation in its entire history. It has very large, very deep capital markets, has an incredible ability to pay its debts. So overall, while those two questions, the question of what is the reserve currency and how does it affect your debt performance, are related, they're not identical, and at the end of the day, it's our ability and our ability to repay debt and the actual repayment of debt as it rolls over that is the most important guide to our ability to continue to maintain high ratings for U.S. Treasuries.